Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Conversion Therapy Panel discussion. My name is Lee Webb. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am one of the co-chairs of Delaware, Ohio Pride. A few warnings before we get started here. Tonight's discussion, we do have a trigger warning. The following video contains material that may be harmful or traumatizing to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised, and that warning will be going across the bottom of the screen throughout our whole presentation. I am going to go ahead and bring in everyone that will be on our panel discussion tonight to introduce themselves, and then we will get started into the questions. Hi there. All right, we'll start with Amanda, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Amanda Rodenberg. Is there anything we're specifically supposed to share, Lee?
Just pronouns, and
Okay.
We'll just stick with that and make it simple and just go around. And if you want to
Perfect.
say anything about, for those of you that have credentials or anything, you can mention those during this as well.
Okay, great. I'm Amanda Rodenberg, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi, I'm Mike Colts, and my pronouns are they, them.
And then Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Broyles, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Okay. And then Spencer. You're muted, Spencer.
Tell I don't use technology much. My name's Spencer Webb, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Curtis Galloway. I use he, him, or they, them.
Okay. Alrighty. We are going to go ahead and get into the questions part of the panel. I'm going to have the two people that will be answering, and everyone else, we will talk to you soon. So, alrighty. Well, welcome Jim and Curtis. Our first question is actually for both of you, and as far as answering, we're going to go in the order, so we'll go Curtis first and then Jim, but I wanted to ask you both while you're here. What is the goal of conversion therapy?
So in short, I mean, the goal of conversion therapy is to change someone's sexuality or gender identity. That's really what it boils down to. But there's also a lot of other things like indoctrination into whatever belief system is being used, and also instilling a sense of shame so that the individual is better controlled by those that are doing the conversion therapy. But essentially, conversion therapy is any attempt by a licensed professional or otherwise to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Okay. And then Jim, same question for you.
So I'm going to go along with the same idea that Curtis gave, that we, I think from a broader, like maybe more research perspective, we would say that it is the attempt to change a person's gender identity or sexual orientation, and we call it sexual orientation change efforts. So, more specifically, the way we look at it is we think about it more in terms of it's a coercive approach to making changes in those kinds of characteristics that seem more innate to that person. And I guess I would add too that I would use the word therapy loosely, because that gives it a connotation that somehow it is been researched and demonstrated to be effective and approved, and none of that really applies. So I want to take the therapy part off of it, but that's the basic definition.
Yeah, and to clarify, it is always an attempt to change someone to be cis straight, cis heterosexual. I've never seen it go any other way except towards that goal.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it ended up blacking out my screen. For Curtis, can you kind of explain the conversion therapy dropout network that you're involved in?
Yeah, so the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network is my organization that I founded about 2 years ago. We're focused on building community for the conversion therapy survivor. Back when I founded the organization, there really wasn't a solid organization that really met the needs of the survivor as far as community and garnering meaningful relationships with those that have experienced the same thing. So I set out to do that with the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, and we hold space for survivors to come together and to really kind of share their experiences, share their traumas, how they've gotten along the way that they have. If someone is further along in their journey through their trauma of conversion therapy, then there's some people that aren't, and we try to bring those together so that they can find mutual healing with one another. And that's the basis of what we do. We also do education, of course, doing panels and such and outreach. So, but that's what we do. We want to bring conversion therapy survivors together solely to build a community based on mutual healing and sharing of stories.
Thank you I wanted to make sure people knew more about Conversion Therapy Network, and
yeah,
that's what you do.
Absolutely.
So that wasn't on our list, but I had to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone that wants to learn more information can go to our website, conversiontherapydropout.org.
Okay. The next question we have is for you. To your knowledge, how many people have undergone this type of treatment, and what are the effects?
So it's a little hard to nail down any numbers, especially since the numbers that we do have are going on, are 6 years old, going on 7. According to the SAMHSA report in 2015, they estimated that about 700,000 people had been subjected to conversion therapy, and that about 65,000 more would go under conversion therapy before they reach the age of 18, which of course those are going to change dramatically throughout the years. Also, if you look at, the survey that the Trevor Project did, they found that 6 out of 10 LGBTQ youth have reported that someone attempted to change their sexual orientation, and it breaks down from there. But I mean, we're thousands upon thousands of youth and non-youth are going to conversion therapy still, even in states where it's illegal. So it's still a problem, and there are lots of people experiencing it. As far as the effects, it really depends on the person. A lot of us, in fact, a vast majority of us that I've ever met, we all suffer from different levels and types of PTSD or anxiety disorders because of the experiences that we went through. It does lead to higher risk of depression, higher risk of drug use, higher risk of attempted suicide, higher risk of STI infections, just based on the ripple effects that it really has. And you can get into some really gritty numbers with those, but those are the basics. And depending on what the person experienced, they may also have sexual dysfunction, depending on, what exactly happened, right? May also have difficulty building relationships or holding a job, increased anxiety. And overall, it has been deemed overwhelmingly harmful by every major psychological association in the US and even, worldwide. There is huge condemnation of any attempt to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity, whether you call it conversion therapy or whatever you're calling it. The consensus is that it is pseudoscience and overwhelmingly harmful for the individual and should not be attempted.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to bring Jim back in here. Hi there, Jim.
Hi.
We're going to go on to our next question. We're going to start with Curtis. Hasn't conversion therapy been discredited and even banned in some states? And is it still really going on?
Yes, yes, it is. And yes, it has been discredited. I mean, it's been discredited across the nation, like I said, by every major psychological association. But that's not stopping people. We've seen a lot of science coming out for recent events that people don't listen to. So it's no wonder that people don't listen to the psychological associations when they say that it's overwhelmingly harmful. Even in states that it's banned, there are still loopholes. So I worked on the ban in Illinois and did testimony for it, but that was only to protect the youth, anyone under the age of 18 from going to a licensed counselor. That doesn't take into account, religious leaders or parents or even just someone that does this. I think one of the people that was doing work at, I forget the organization's name, but they had absolutely no credentials in any sort of therapeutic practice or anything. And they were, trained in doing conversion therapy. And that's not necessarily, prohibited under the law. So there's a lot of loopholes through it. And there's a lot of people not getting caught in that web. A majority of what we're seeing are people that are going to religious leaders for conversion therapy or people that aren't licensed by a state, in which case the laws don't protect that. It is still going on. I'm originally from Southern Illinois. I live in Los Angeles now, but I know some churches that are out there that are doing gay demon exorcisms, or is what they call it, or I think they call it homosexual demon exorcisms. There's a church outside of St. Louis, Missouri that does conversion therapy. There's a guy in Beverly Hills that does reintegrative therapy, even though it's illegal in California, and Illinois too. But it's illegal in California, but that doesn't stop them from providing services to anyone over the age of 18, which is not always voluntary by those people if they're dependent on their parents or guardians or whoever, or societal pressures. Joseph Nicolosi, I don't know if anyone is familiar with that name, but his son took up the mantle after he passed away and is still doing it here in California. For people over the age of 18 that are willing. It is also not a therapeutic practice, so it's not banned in California. It's severely frowned upon, but as you can see, there's a lot of loopholes still happening. And places where it's not banned, it's just like a free-for-all. People can do what they want. So yeah, it is still very much happening, even in places where it's banned.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. And then Jim, the same question for you.
So I want to just touch on just a little bit that previous question about counting and numbers and how common the so-called conversion therapy is. It can be really difficult to get a really accurate estimate of how often coercive therapies are happening. And when I'm saying coercive therapies, I'm saying we're going to pick out for you what your gender identity or sexual orientation should be, and we're going to steer you in that direction. So it's very hard to really accurately count how much that's actually happening, because some of the forms of therapy can be very much under the radar. In other words, it can be very easy for a therapist to be working with, a young person who comes out and says, I'm feeling some feelings of same-sex attraction, and that therapist goes, "Really? What would your parents say about that? Is that going to go over okay in your church? What do they think about that?" So lots of subtle forms that aren't just necessarily being counted. So what we want to think about is, is it still happening, and is it legal? Yes, definitely, it's happening right now, and a lot of states have enacted laws that can make conversion therapy illegal. Ohio has not. And we've had an attempt here in the past at one point to make it illegal, and that was shot down. And what's happening right now is a lot of more local areas, like municipalities, like Columbus, have adopted ordinances that say that this is illegal. There's a subtlety going on here with this, and I think Curtis touched on it just a little bit. What happens is, even though the practice itself is not illegal, most licensed professionals are operating under legal and ethical guidelines. In other words, what we do is guided by our licensing board, the medical board, the state board of psychology, and we're also guided by our ethical principles. And all of those boards and those ethical guidelines do say conversion therapy is an unethical practice. And anyone who's independently licensed here in Ohio or in other states who's practicing that could run into some very serious difficulty because they're doing that. So in that way, there is that guard against it. But as Curtis also mentioned, there are many unlicensed professionals, and many of them are religiously associated, and they're not necessarily connected with those guidelines in any way. And so they have fewer restrictions, and they have fewer guards in place that would protect them from, that would create consequences for them practicing in that area. And in that way, it's because I think it's a lot more common than a lot of people realize.
Yeah. And just some context on that, based on, I have the Trevor Project did their 2020 survey, which has been very enlightening. And Jim, you're right. It's very hard to get numbers for this kind of thing because majority of the time people that are going to it don't have access to even answer a survey because they're so scrutinized while in it. But they had, the Trevor Project concluded that 10% of the youth they surveyed had been taken to conversion therapy, but only 3% of that were by licensed professionals.
Right.
And the rest of it was by...
And that's because of those safety guidelines that are in place that protect, that sort of govern licensed professionals and keep us within those ethical restrictions.
Right. Right.
Thank you to both of you for answering those questions and hopefully enlightening some viewers here. We are going to bring in our other panelists for the next one.
All right.
And we will talk to you guys soon.
Sounds good.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. So we're going to move on to our next question, and we're going to go in the order that it was sent. So we'll start with Spencer, and then Mike, and then Amanda, and we'll have just you individually answer, and then I'll bring each one up in that order, okay? I do want to send out that trigger warning as well before we get this started. We might contain material that will be harmful or traumatizing to some audience members, so viewer discretion is advised. I'll read the question aloud and then have Spencer on his own. And then from there, we'll go on. So could all of you please describe what happened to you in terms of conversion therapy and your story? We'll start off with Spencer.
Hi, everyone. As I said earlier, my name's Spencer Webb, as you can see on the screen. So going back to younger years, and I just kind of give a little bit of a background with this as well. Hold on one second. I apologize. My dog. I do apologize. My dog kept trying to bring me a chew toy. Anyways, so want to go back to younger years, give a little bit of a backstory. Ever since I can remember, I have always felt and, known that I was not just like the quote unquote average guy. I ended up younger years, my first kiss was from another guy in 5th grade. So always going to church growing up with my family. We were in, I would say, more of a conservative church, although my mom would kind of skip among churches growing up. So it was kind of non-denominational and changing depending on how they felt at the time. Primary churches were usually Baptist. And my first time my parents actually found out that I was friends with a gay guy, they did end up, he was at my house. And pretty much they sent him home immediately once they found out like the way he dressed and things like that. The chat came shortly after with my family, and they ended up going and taking me to a Christian counseling. The therapy that I went to was typically a couple times a week, anywhere from 3 to 4 times, I think, depending on my progress. It sounded like by the therapist how much he was requesting, how many more sessions. Well, at this age, I was 12 years old, and we ended up, they would ask you all kinds of things, such as how you felt about guys. They would want you to describe it. I would sometimes have there'd be photos put out for me to look naked women and just talk about like visualizing their body and trying to change my mind as that, young individual. Very very demeaning with your answers. Everything's shut down. Everything's it's always thrown at you back with a Bible verse, or pretty much none of your feelings are valid. They really do try to break you down. I would say between telling you your family is they could be damned and gone to hell for not helping you enough, or like I said, it goes on and on. I know there's different types of this treatment, but again, they do end up breaking you down. I was at one point where I was told, I was at one point where I was told by the therapist that God will never love me, and that I'm never going to love myself, and my family will never love me. And I remember coming to the realization that I just felt very useless and hopeless. And as they mentioned before, you get depressed, you get anxious. I ended up attempting suicide before the age of 16, 4 times, multiple different ways, planning. And you're that age, you don't have control. You don't have a car, or at least I didn't. I didn't have a car by the time I turned 16. I didn't have a cell phone, things like that. I was very much secluded to my room. Church on the weekends, not really hanging with friends as much as possible. Very secluded on even that time spent, not alone. My door was taken off my bedroom. So I kind of faked it and played it. The only thing that got me by in that middle time was a good friend of mine named, a good friend of mine, and she ended up helping me get through. She actually was the term I think they use is beard, but a girlfriend, and kind of really got me to love myself again. So went through with church, and the reason for the long part in between is because I did end up getting put back into conversion therapy. My sophomore year in high school, my parents caught me dating another guy at this time, which is actually my husband now. And I ended up getting outed by a girl at my church. She saw us at 4th of July fireworks, and she even years later came and told me something completely different. I apologize for it, but she did out me to my family again, and followed with that was even more intense therapy and treatment. Again, I can't really personally describe how harmful it is, just because I feel like it's something that I can't share how harmful it is, just because it's one of those things that you really have to, well, I hope you don't ever, but it's one of the things you have to go through to really fully understand what full rock bottom feels like. I feel like the second time was even almost worse, because you go through all that again just to get, ripped down when you just started feeling good about yourself again, and feeling like, there is hope. There's, more afterwards of this. But I went through another probably about 6 months of that, and then finally did get out. So I think we are going to take some Q&A later. So if anyone has more questions, I'm happy to personally answer.
Thank you for answering that, Spencer. We are going to move on to Mike. Hey there, Mike.
Hello.
All right. Same question for you. Could you describe your story and what happened with you?
Sure. Hey everyone. So my name's Mike. I came out when I was 15 years old, and both my parents, super religious, super involved in the church. And when I talk about coming out, one of the first questions I get is, well, if you knew your parents were religious and you yourself grew up in the church, why would you ever come out at that age? Like, were you scared? And honestly, I was more scared of my friends finding out at the time than my parents, because my parents and I just were super close. And being raised in the church, I was taught that God is love and Jesus loves everyone and we are created in his image. So there was no doubt in my young little mind that my parents were ever going to have an issue with it. And as soon as I told them at 15, I knew within seconds I made a huge mistake. My mom's exact words were, no, you're not. And my dad says, we are going to change you. And within days, I was sent off to a camp, a disciplinary action camp for troubled youth, which was basically a not very good place for people who were struggling with their sexuality. And everything was on routine. You woke up at a certain time, you ate at a certain time, you went to chapel, you had prayer meetings, you had Bible studies, you had evening chapel, you had numerous one-on-one talks, which I call them interrogations, with certain religious leaders that are basically just you sitting in a chair with a person either yelling at you, telling you how disgusting you are. I was told things like I was going to burn in hell, that my family would never want to see me again, that I was better off dead if I continued this lifestyle. So very quickly, it has a toll on you. And that whole thing that Spencer just said about breaking you down is so incredibly true. They want to remove any ounce of who you are. They want to completely just shatter you so that they can replace what they want you to be, which is both what Curtis and Jim were talking about earlier too, where they want you to be a specific cisgendered person, and you would be that at the end of the day, whether you wanted to or not. And so I was there for months. Honestly, I could not tell you how exactly long, because with everything going on, you turn into a shell of a person and numb, and you kind of just go along with the motions in hopes that you make it out alive. And so finally, I get out of this type of camp, and I'm going home. And I am hoping that this is the end of it, that I paid my dues and I can start to rebuild whatever life I can get back. And so when I return home, again, being young and naive and maybe not as intelligent or level-headed as I am now, I expected almost that my parents would invite me in with open arms and everything would be good. Well, when I got home, everything in my bedroom was removed, literally nothing but a pillow and a blanket. My dad had screwed my window shut so I couldn't open it. My handle on the inside of the door was removed and a deadbolt was put on the outside of the door, and an alarm system on that door as well as the window. And I was again locked in for months again, being monitored 24/7 by them. I was allowed out to take a shower and use the restroom, and that was it. I had nothing to do, no contact with the outside world, no contact with them. They wouldn't even talk to me. They wouldn't even look at me. When they would bring me food, I would ask them numerous times, like, what's going on? Like, can we talk about this? Like, I'm sorry. I started apologizing for who I was. And I just remember nightly crying myself to sleep and begging this God that I felt was punishing me for who I was. And actually, I started believing that he viewed me as disgusting just to make me straight or to let me die. Those are my only two options. And of course, luckily, one of them didn't happen. And luckily, the other didn't happen either, because, it's impossible. But I remember one day really at kind of my breaking moment of thinking about if I just jump out of this 2-story window and I make my body move through this glass and I hit the ground, maybe everything will be over. And then I thought, no, that I'm not going to let them have this control over me. I'm not going to let them win. And whatever voice it was, the universe, if you believe in God, if it was a God, said, play the part till you make it out. And so the next time my parents came to deliver food, I said, can I have a Bible? And my mom's face, for probably the first time, actually looked happy, which is super sad. But she immediately was like, yes. And she went and grabbed a Bible. And so for the next couple months, I started making sure I was reading it in front of them and highlighting certain parts and taking notes because I asked for a notebook and a pen and they gave it to me. And so I just started playing the part. And within a few weeks of really doing that, my door was allowed to be left open. And then I was allowed to wander around the house with them. And I didn't mention this earlier, but they took me out of school, obviously, and I went into a homeschool independent study program. And so I just poured my life into reading the Bible and making it seem like I was changing and being fixed and schoolwork. That's all I ever did. And then I was allowed to go places with certain friends, still being monitored, but then I was allowed to take college classes at a young age. And then I graduated high school early. And then I got to go to college early. And I still went to a college that was a Baptist school, and I was still being monitored, but that was freedom. From going from being locked into a camp to being locked into your room to now I graduated high school early and I'm going to college early, even though it's a Christian school, that was freedom to me. And so I played the part from the age of 15 to 21 years old when I finally graduated from university. And kind of that's when I started dealing with everything that I had been through was 21. And here we are now. So hopefully there's a Q&A. If you have any specific questions, I will answer them. But for now, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mike, for answering that for us. I'm going to bring in Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
Hello.
All right. Same question for you. Could you describe your story and what happened to you?
Sure. So I had my first girl kiss when I was in high school. I was about probably 17, and it was enlightening to me. It was exciting. It was all of those things that you would expect kind of a first meaningful kiss to be. And then it came crashing down around me. That girl then accused me of some terrible things and turned a bunch of my friends or a bunch of our friends against me. And so that relationship, that experience was really traumatizing for me. And I just sort of put my burgeoning sexuality kind of into a box and just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. That was painful. And so then I just sort of left that alone. And then the summer after my sophomore year in college, I got into another relationship with another woman while I was working at Cedar Point. And I fell head over heels in love and felt loved for the first time by someone in a truly, just valuable way. And I didn't really know what to expect from my parents, but I did go home at that point in the semester, sort of in the fall, after we had been in a relationship for a couple of months, to tell them, because I just felt like I have to tell them. My parents were really important to me at that point in my life. And So I did. I drove home and from school, from college, and I told them, um, and it didn't go over well. It was painful and hard, and some awful things were said. And then I turned around and I just drove right back to college without spending the night. It was another 3-hour drive back to the school where I went. I stayed in that relationship for a little while longer, but then my parents at that point had become quite evangelical. Separate situation with my brother, who had been addicted to drugs and then come off of drugs through the power of Christ, changed them. I worked for him, and I don't mean to belittle that for my brother. That was an experience that he had, and that changed our family at that point, changed our family dynamic. And so my family was quite evangelical, quite religious at that point. And so my parents began to pray for me to be released from the demon of lesbianism, from the demons of homosexuality. And I began to equate my worth as a human being, my worth as their child, with whether or not I could stop being who I was. I felt like I had to choose. I certainly had to choose between the relationship I was in and my parents. And at 19, I desperately still needed my parents in my life. So I made that choice. I didn't choose God or Jesus or being straight or any of that. I chose a relationship with my parents. And then that became something where I had to then go into reparative therapy, join their church, become involved in all sorts of change efforts, sexual orientation change efforts. I joined a number of regional and local groups in Ohio, as well as a online forum that was based out of Texas. I went to conferences and retreats and things like that with Exodus International at the time, which is no longer exists. But I did reparative therapy for about 10 years from the time I was 19 or so until about the time I was 29. The most controversial thing that happened to me was a practice called reparenting that was early on, where our pastor, the director of the youth group that I had joined that was out of Texas, actually took turns holding me and the other young people like we were small children, babies, to his chest, and trying to sort of rebirth us into a different environment where we would have been loved and would have been straight, would have been the correct gender expression and sexual expression for our body type, if you were. So that was super harmful and weird. Mostly it was a lot of talk therapy and solo and groups, where they blamed our sexuality on failings from our parents. Either our parents were, especially our mothers, were either too overly doting or too feminine, or they were somehow not feminine enough. Somehow it all became my mother's fault. And I hate that for my parents at the time, believing that. We had to do really strange things like write out our sins about pornography or masturbation or things like that, and then nail them to a physical cross. They tried to make things very visceral and physical so that we would have these sort of physical connotations to things that would make us never do it again if we had to experience something physical connected with what we had done. At conferences, it was always super dramatic and manipulative. I had a pastor try to bring down the spirit of tongues upon me. to try and set me free from my homosexuality. Another pastor tried to physically push me over. He put his hand on my head and tried to push me over to kind of display the Spirit's power to change my life. There was just so many things that happened over those 10 years. There were also just sort of strange exercises that you might think are laughable, where the guys in the group would have to play flag football, not touch or tackle football, because they weren't allowed to touch each other, but flag football. And then the girls in the group would have to have Mary Kay consultants come and talk about fashion and makeup usage, like some sort of how we were displayed would make us less gay. So I'm forever grateful that I found some other people who were that I just stopped believing in some ways. I started to see some of my friends who I had made huge, long relationships with through these, especially the forums, start to question, start to wonder, start to defy the teachings that we were being given. And I went to a wedding between two friends of mine who decided to marry in a same gender relationship, and it sort of just blew my world apart. I loved them and I wanted to celebrate them, but I also didn't know how to sort of reconcile that in my heart. And that's when it started to break open, and I started to sort of disbelieve and walk away from this and start to see that not everything, not anything that they were teaching us was true. That we could still be loved and love ourselves as gay individuals, as queer individuals. So long story short, now I am long past those days, and happily who I am, and happy to answer other questions if we go into a Q&A period. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm actually going to bring in everyone that spoke their stories back in. And hello, everyone. I just wanted to bring everyone back in. If there was anything from your story that you wanted to add or say, we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to say their full story. And then we did end up getting one question. It was, and we'll get to that if anyone doesn't want to add to their story. Did anyone want to add anything else besides what they said? No?
I think I would just add that now, as a grown adult and in a much healing relationship with my wife, and now having a baby girl, my relationship with my parents has become so much better. And I hope that for others, that there has been so much healing, and my parents are so now progressive, and now fighting for my rights, and now fighting for the rights of my wife and our child. And they don't believe those things anymore. And so if you're out there and you are struggling with parents who do not see you for who you are, who you want to be, or who you feel you are, that it isn't always written in stone. I won't say it always changes, but hopefully in time they will come to see you for who you are and come to see the truth as well.
That's actually in one of our questions. Heather, a viewer, asked for Mike, what type of relationship you have currently with your parents?
So, very, very distant. Over the years, there's been periods of time where I won't even talk to them, want nothing to do with them. After, I do want to add, sorry, you just reminded me of something. I do want to add that the reason I started on a journey, because I have no idea where I would be without this person, but my last semester at that Baptist university, one of my professors is the one who really kind of knew that I was this young person that needed help. Didn't know everything about but really kind of started talking to me and was like, you know that you were created exactly who you were meant to be. Like there's nothing wrong with you. And they were really the ones who kind of started me on this journey of self-discovery and allowing myself to deconstruct everything that I had been taught and was forced to think. And so I owe them a lot. But in regards to that, it kind of backfired on my parents because my parents are the ones who sent me there. So, they were expecting to keep me like on this journey of self-destruction. And in fact, it ended with like me breaking through and finally being like, enough is enough. I am who I am. This is who I am. And so I had a conversation with my parents probably at the age of 23, 24. And I asked them, I said, do you regret anything? Like, if you could go back in time, would you not send me? Would you, maybe learn from it? Do you have any, are you apologetic in any way? And both of them said no, that they regretted not doing anything more. And so there was at that moment where I was like, I want nothing to do with you. And there is this idea that your people who raise you, you owe them everything. That no matter who you are, you have to sacrifice yourself to have a relationship with them. And even if they're toxic for you, you still have to have a relationship with them. And that was another thing I had to unlearn, was that just because they raised me, just because I called them mom and dad, does not mean that they have the best interest at heart and that they actually love me unconditionally. And there is a lot of power when you understand that, because you remove the control that they have on you. And you stop apologizing for who you are and allowing them to do or say certain things to you. So today, I have spoken to my mom a few times over the years. I've spoken to my dad a few times over the years, but it's very surface level. How you doing? Good. Still alive? Yes. And we, that's it. But that's okay, because that's what needed to happen.
Did anyone else want to answer that question as well, as far as your relationship currently with your parents?
I'll chime in. So as of today, I did go through a lot more afterwards from, I do as well, I feel I want to add that too. After all of that, my senior year in high school, I did end up getting kicked out of my house, and I was living in my car for a couple months before I moved in with my husband's family at that time. And for years and years, I tried to avoid my family. I tried to give them little as possible. Wasn't close with my sisters then either. Didn't have a lot of support from them at the time. As of today, I would say that my sisters are big part of my life. My parents, I would say I do talk to them once in a while, not as often as I think they would like. But it's always kind of a guard. I don't feel like I can still truly be myself fully. It's very like almost like minimal necessary, if that makes sense. But like I said, I think I have asked them this kind of similar question is, have you regretted any of that, or, would you change? And it's almost kind of like, it's always getting the answer of, I love you, but they won't ever really answer it fully. They won't really ever admit that, they did notice how bad it was hurting me. But again, it comes down to the I love you, but, and that's one of the sayings I like to say with a lot of, not all Christians, but a lot of Christians is, even friends. I lost a lot of friends out of that over that time. Again, I think some people need to let the but part go and just realize that, you can literally love without having an ending to that. So, but yeah.
Thank you for answering that. We did get another question from Heather as well. This is to all the panelists that shared their story. They asked, have any of you reconciled faith and your sexuality? Whoever would like to answer.
I'll answer. I think I have beliefs and I do have faith. And I think it only strengthened and took on a more freeing meaning, if that makes sense, once I accepted myself. Because the hatred that I had for myself, I was projecting on everything and everyone that I come into contact with. So that even being, whether you pray or you meditate or you go out in the wilderness or on a beach and you find that spiritual faith or that feeling, that hatred for myself was keeping me from even doing any of that. So it only got stronger once I accepted myself.
Anyone else want to answer that question?
I'll jump in. I think to some extent, like Mike said, I do have my own sort of personal beliefs and experiences with deity or divine. I do believe that the 10 years of manipulation and coercion by the church has tainted Christianity for me in a way that I can't quite get back to a place where I feel comfortable and at ease in the Christian church. I do attend church. My spouse, my wife, is a chaplain. She is a chaplain with the and she's in the United Church of Christ, and so we are, by trade, we're kind of a religious family. But I still always have my guard up when we're in a worship space. There are very few people that I trust with my faith in a way that I will hear with an open heart what they have to say when it comes from the Bible, when it comes to sort of a more religious bent on things. And especially if I end up in a space that is overly evangelical, where people are trying to call people forward to repent or to receive the gifts of the Spirit, that is so deeply triggering for me that I almost always have to leave the worship space and am deeply anxious and unokay for a while. So yeah, I have faith and I have beliefs and I have a security that I am loved by our Creator, but I am super boundaried and guarded about how I experience that, how and who I let into that space with me.
All right, thank you for answering that. We are gonna bring up Curtis and Jim again, and we'll put you guys back, and we will talk to all of you again soon, okay? Hello there, Jim. Hello, Curtis.
Hi again.
Hello.
We're going to move on. Hi there. We're going to move on down our agenda for the next question. It's for both of you. Can you tell us if what was described by these panelists is typical for them, and what other kinds of things happen during, parentheses, treatment, as they like to say? And we'll start with...
Sorry?
Curtis, would you like me to start? No, go ahead and start.
Yeah, go ahead. Good. I went first last time. You can go.
Okay.
So, that's a tough question because, conversion therapy is not an accepted, form of therapy, and it's not really being studied. There isn't like any kind of formally accepted theory. We don't have the same data and research around this like we would, other more commonly accepted forms of therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually a mainstream therapy, and we can gather some real data around that, right? So, my response as a psychologist is, what is this typical of what happens? Who knows? A lot of this stuff is happening in the shadows, right? But I'll tell you one thing that, stands out to me about the experiences of the people who are talking, very moving experiences. And you can hear, some very heartfelt expressions of, pain and damage that that was done as a result of those experiences. And there are so many people who've had these experiences, who've been through these forms of so-called treatment, who have experienced real trauma. You know, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder are very real things, right? So I would say, you know, one of the things that we want to think about is that you heard me use that word a little bit earlier, coercive. And coercive means any kind of therapy that's aimed at a fixed outcome. So in other words, I've decided as the therapist or the treatment provider ahead of time that, you know, you will have this given sexual orientation. As Curtis pointed out, it's usually straight, right? Or if you will have this particular gender identity, and, you know, typically that's, you know, cisgender. So any type of therapy that's aimed at that tends to be very damaging for the person. So a real therapist, a therapist who's going to approach really trying to help a person with a modality that's demonstrated to actually be effective, they're going to see themselves as a person who's supporting that person through the process of self-discovery. You heard our panelists talk about self-love and self-acceptance. That's what gets past depression. That's what gets past anxiety. And the therapist is sort of a catalyst who supports that person through that process of helping them to get to the place where they understand who they genuinely are and they can express their authentic self. That's what brings happiness. That's what brings, you know, real psychological strength.
Thank you, Jen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, that it is pretty, based on what I see, you know, I interface with a lot of conversion therapy survivors, and based on that, yes, it is very typical, those stories, with varying degrees of extremes on each end. You know, with myself, you know, I've heard Mike tell their story before, and I identify with theirs, but also with Amanda, which I want to point out is actually amazing, because I have not met another person whose parents ended up being supportive on the other end of it, which my parents have. So it's kind of cool for me personally that their parents are accepting now. But it is typical, you know, we see these camps, people going for years and years and years, having the religious trauma afterwards, going to these therapists, as it were, and having all of that trauma. I see it a lot. And it's yeah. Other things that can happen during the treatment, I mean, it just depends, you know. You've heard about, you know, the electroshock. I've heard of that still happening. People that are made to watch pornography and given Epicac to vomit, so that in inducing vomiting to try and remove the sexual urges from them. You know, we hear of that too. To the rebirthing, you know, I hear all of this all the time. It's very typical, and with varying degrees of severity, like I said. And I agree with Jim with what he said about, you know, the therapist having the one outcome, right? That's what we see a lot of, and that's not how therapy is supposed to work, as Jim pointed out. But we see that a lot as well, and having the bias of the therapist out there. You know, personally for me, I saw a lot of my therapist pushing his own like personal like demons on me, right? Because he would talk about on his website or he talks about rather on his website about his struggle with his sexual orientation and his struggle with XYZ. And it's like, it's not about the therapist. And we see that coming out a lot.
Can I make a quick comment about that, Curtis? Do you mind?
Go ahead, please.
I just want to throw something out there. When you're talking about, like, for example, in the state of Ohio, those people who can practice behavioral health independently, those people who can practice therapy independently, those are social workers, clinical counselors, and psychologists, right? And each of us have, as a part of our ethical guidelines, that we are not permitted to place our personal values on our clients. And for us to guide or coerce our clients into embracing our own personal values is unethical and therefore in Ohio illegal.
Yeah.
Just want to make that really clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, it's like, I don't care if you've had issues with your sexuality in the past. It's not about you, you know, and that shouldn't be a part of someone else's therapy experience. But yeah, no, I mean, these stories are very typical of what we see. Absolutely. I hear stories like this all the time.
The other thing that I would add too, lots of wacky theories.
Oh, yeah.
Theories that have been around for a long time. And, you know, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring therapy and behavioral health into the modern scientific world. So that basically just means we're going to do research to see, is this theory really borne out in reality? Does the experience of people in reality actually reflect this theory? So we're hearing things like craziness, things like, you know, oh, well, you were for gay men, it can be you were too close with your mother and too disconnected from your father, and you haven't had enough of those sort of male bonding experiences, or maybe you need to get to the gym more often, or maybe the women need to have more Mary Kay lessons, right? We heard all of that there. There is nothing, there's not a shred of evidence that shows that those kinds of experiences have any kind of influence on sexual orientation. None whatsoever, right?
That's what I was told. Yeah.
What I'm saying is I can have a theory that says the world is flat. We laugh at that. There are people who believe that, okay? I can have a theory that says the world is flat, right? But sooner or later, we have to take the trip across the ocean around the world to see if anybody really falls off, or are we truly going around in a circle? That's what we're doing here. Are these theories really borne out in reality? Does our evidence show us that? That's a huge part of what we do as psychologists.
Okay. Thank you both for answering that. We did have a question in the comments, and both of you can kind of elaborate on it. It kind of ties on what you were speaking about. Someone, Carrie Joy is the commenter, and she asked, are there any things going on to shut down these types of practices, and are there protection laws?
Yes, my answer to that would be yes, there are. And so now we're getting a little bit more into legal and political territory, and Curtis can probably talk about this a little bit too. But yes, absolutely, there are laws. The laws that are emerging right now tend to be laws at the state level. So in other words, our federal government is sort of like letting the individual states decide that on a state-by-state basis. There are many states where conversion therapy is illegal. Ohio is not one of them. We've had bills in the legislature before. They have been shot down. There is one in the legislature right now, you know, but in terms of, the actual, an actual law on the books in Ohio that restricts this from actually being practiced right now, no, there is not. Again, we have more local city ordinances like the city of Columbus. And most importantly, with professionals, we have ethical guidelines that are governed by medical board, psychology board, counselor board that do restrict practice in this area. But there are people who are doing so-called conversion therapy who aren't governed by any by any of these boards or ethical guidelines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we are seeing the bans and we're seeing those restrictions in different municipalities, which is great. I mean, I kind of touched on this before, that there's still loopholes in them, but I mean, we're trying. This is something that just in the past 10 years has really come to the forefront of people's minds and is really kind of the next step for a lot of organizations to fight against this. As far as, Jim, what you were saying about the ethical guidelines, there are ways to go about doing that. I'm in the midst of taking out an ethics complaint with the Board of Social Work against my therapist in Kentucky, and that's always a way to do it as well. And I think we'll touch on this a little bit later, but I mean, some of the problems we run into is the religious freedom aspect of it. That's where we really get into the weeds with a lot of these. And I think that's why the federal government has really kind of skirted around the issue more or less, just because of that. And it's a very a United States issue where we get into that. But no, there's a lot of people working on this just round the clock in every state. There are people working on this. It's just a matter of breaking through the BS and getting down to the fact that this is abuse. It's fraud. It's not real. It goes against every ethical guideline, and you can't abuse people.
And it's deadly.
And it's deadly. Yeah.
People are losing their lives because this understanding is not being respected.
Well, and it's one of those things where if it was anything else, the sheer amount of people that have been harmed by it versus the people that claim that it doesn't vastly outweighs it, and we wouldn't allow it.
We had a medication or another form of medical treatment that was killing this many people, it would have been restricted a long time ago.
Oh my God, people would have freaked out and immediately would have been pulled. But for some reason, when it comes to LGBTQ plus community, there's like this double standard. Like, well, is it really? It drives me nuts. So,
absolutely.
We're gonna move on to the next question, which kind of mentions what Curtis brought up. The question is, it sounds reasonable to allow churches to be exempt from any law that would restrict or ban conversion therapy, especially if it's just, in parentheses, talk therapy, not physical. And what is concerning about that?
Everything. Everything's concerning about that. That's one of the biggest pushbacks that we get, because like I talked about before, a vast majority of people aren't going to licensed therapists for this kind of thing. So it's very difficult. And religious leaders are specifically exempt from these laws because it is the only way we can get it through without the opposition screaming about religious freedom. And it drives me absolutely crazy, because if you break it down to its basics, we're trying to protect people from being abused and from harmful practices. And you can have religious freedom all you want, but you cannot abuse people, and even the talk therapies, it does sound like it would be fine if it was just talk therapy, but talk therapy also causes all of the things that we've seen. It still causes that deep-seated hatred of oneself, deep-seated, anxiety and PTSD. It still causes all of that. And it's still just as abusive, even in a religious setting. And in some cases, it can be even worse, because then you have that religious trauma on top of it. So it's one of the biggest hurdles that we're facing in the United States to overcome this aspect of religious freedom. Canada is actually better off with it, because they're actually restricting it regardless on your religious beliefs, because for some reason they've got it together and realize that it's abuse, and religious freedom is not the freedom to abuse youth or anyone. And so that's really what it comes down to.
I would say that, as soon as we use the words talk therapy, we're diluting how powerful those therapeutic experiences really can be, for the better, for the worse. So, I think that's an important consideration to make. And I would say that when we think about LGBT folks and we understand what kinds of experiences can really be helpful for them, they include things like education. Let's really talk about this condition and what it really is and what it really is not. Then let's talk about, what your options and choices are in the world, right? So getting that kind of information to an individual can be enormously helpful, right? And so I would say many so-called conversion therapy experiences tend to deny all of that. This is my interpretation of the condition that your actual qualities as a person and what you are experiencing, and these are the only choices that you have. So it's a very, very narrow view that's being given to that person, which causes a huge amount of damage, right? So if I said to you, that if a family had a child who was, say, for example, diabetic, and the pastor says, I know how we're going to cure this problem. We're going to do an exorcism, and the exorcism is going to cure this child's condition and make them whole again. We wouldn't stand for that. We wouldn't tolerate that for a second. Because what's really being denied in that circumstance is, let's really talk about what diabetes really is, what's really happening inside of the body, and let's help that family and that individual child understand what your options and choices are. And ultimately, we'd probably even step in if that child's life was in danger and say they have a right to the right kind of medical treatment, regardless. And the church might come back in that moment and say, wait a minute, it's just an exorcism. It's just a ceremony. It's just a religious ceremony. That's right. It really is. But so much is being denied from that person that they're not getting the true, potentially life-saving help that they need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even more with that, it's not even that, that they need anything else. It's not even a problem. It boils down to that being LGBTQ plus isn't even an issue that needs to be fixed.
Right.
And so that's, that just adds
Right.
another layer to it.
I'm glad you said that, Curtis, and you are absolutely right. And one of the things that I think we should think through with our minology there is the depression and the anxiety and the sense of being lost that comes from a person with feelings of same-sex attraction, a person who's experiencing, some gender identity concerns. Those things that the depression and the anxiety that can go with that, they need the right kind of help and resources.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for answering that. Our next question says, sometimes you hear of cases in which conversion therapy has worked, in parentheses. So people think that if a person wants to try to change, why is it a problem to help them do so?
Well, there's never been a confirmed case of it working, ever. Every single person that you'll hear about that is saying that they call it ex-gay, right? You'll hear about them being found in a gay bar, making out with another man or another woman or whatever you want to call it or whatever. It's not a thing. And the problem with trying to help them is that you're taking them to abuse. It would be a lot better, like Jim said, that these people that are having anxieties and having issues with their sexuality and gender identity is get them the help that they need. The help to identify why they feel that way. Why do you feel this anxiety? Why do you feel like you want to change your sexuality or gender identity? What does it really come down to? And work through it that way. It's the same thing where it's, okay, well, we're going to just make you cis straight. That's a problem. That is not the way to go. That's really what it is. If someone were to approach me today, and I mean, I do get people, that reach out to me asking about conversion therapy. And I just explain to them, well, no, conversion therapy doesn't work. You need to go to an actual therapist that can help you work through why you're wanting to change your orientation or identity. And that's the important part to remember about it. But as far as hearing of cases where it worked, I haven't seen one yet where I'm convinced that it worked. Ever.
Most of the evidence that we have about any kind of successful change, for example, in sexual orientation, come from anecdotal stories that people are telling. Yeah, I used to be gay, but now I'm straight. And, just a year ago, I was part of the gay lifestyle. Now I'm, married to an opposite sex person. It's those stories that we hear. And we know for a fact that people are able to repress feelings of same-sex attraction for shorter periods. There's no evidence at all that people have been able to successfully sustain a real change in sexual orientation over the long term. There's no evidence.
None. But on the contrary, there's a lot of evidence that shows that, people can't change their orientation and shouldn't change it. So it comes to that same thing. It's like there's a lot of evidence for one side, none for the other. So why are we still considering it?
Right. That's probably the single most important fact right there that Curtis is bringing up. There's no evidence that people can actually change their sexual orientation or their gender identity.
Or that they even should,
Thank you both for answering that. We're actually going to bring in everyone else back in for last couple questions. Welcome back, everyone. This next question for everyone. It says, what do people who oppose conversion therapy do to help? And it's an open question to whoever would like to answer first.
I'll go. I would say just supporting. I think it starts with just supporting your LGBT individuals, or even family members. Just even initiating that you are an ally or supportive. Get that out there. Be kind of voicious about it. Spread it, because I think for younger generations or someone who is experiencing issues, it lets them know that there's someone okay in the family to speak to. I feel like I had a lot more family members came to me later stating that they were supportive, but I never would have known it, because at that time you feel like you're in your own bubble. Nothing outside of that bubble matters at that moment. You're just trying to get through into the next day. So again, I think just sharing to your family, friends, that you are an ally, doing just little things like that. And for those that do attend church regularly or have church friends and family, bring things up like this. It's all about awareness and spreading education. Knowledge is power. So
Yeah, likewise, I would say that to be a safe person for people to share their concerns, their sexuality, their truths with, and be an out loud safe person for that person to share. If somebody tells you something about their sexuality, about their gender identity, believe them. That's their experience. It's not a phase. It's not it's not something that you just had one experience and it's not the same. Stop just sort of pushing away young people's experiences. If a 13-year-old comes up and tells you that they're bi, but they haven't had any sexual experiences yet, that's not yours to say whether or not they're bi or whether or not they are asexual or pansexual or whatever words that they want to use to describe themselves and who they are, what their experience is. Believe them, and be a safe person for them. Take them to pride parades, take them to places where they can see their people, to where they can see, healthy, happy individuals who have similar experiences as they do. Show them the good, because it's out there, and they need to see it. They don't need to be scared by the stories of the bad. We all know that the bad and the hard and the difficult things are out there too. The challenging things, the terrible stories, they're out there for everyone. But show them the good and be that safe person.
I'm going to add on to both what Spencer and Amanda said, because absolutely be that safe space is so, so important, and the believing them. And as soon as I started being very vocal about my story, I learned a lot too, because I always thought I was alone. So having the conversation, understanding that there are others who are going through it, who have been through it, who might not even realize that they went through it, because it could come from anyone. And so really, really having that conversation with other people and continuing that conversation and being aware, like Spencer was talking about, and just being that safe space. I think that is so important.
Absolutely. That actually really makes a good point. When I experienced my conversion therapy, I didn't know what it was until later when I met someone that was a safe space that knew what it was and knew the effects, and they were able to help me start that reconciliation. So that's very, very important. And additionally, be educated on what conversion therapy is. I mean, obviously, if you're here, you're learning about it, but really read up on it and look into your local laws, your state laws. If there's anything pending, call your legislators. If there is an actual bill on the table that is trying to get through, and show your support and tell them to tell them that some guy on a video told me to call you and support this bill, and really get involved. And that's really how we're going to squash this, is through education and legislation, and really kind of push away the bias that causes the conversion theory phenomenon, is what I call it. Those are both very important aspects of how we can bring it into this.
I really want to echo this comment about educate yourself. Think about all the factual information that we've actually given here. Think about all the information that we're discussing here that's supported by real life experience and real life data that we have. Educate yourself, know the truth of all of that, and talk freely with everyone. There may be people in your community, in your church, and other kinds of settings where maybe they don't really know anybody who's LGBT, but you can talk openly about this is the truth, this is the reality, this is what we really know to be true. And in terms of information, we're still in the dark ages, and we need to come out of that and bring that into the light. We're talking about the light in here. So I would say, be willing to have those conversations and bring that information forward. I also like what Curtis said earlier, because he was talking about making the complaint to the board in Kentucky. And I would say, remember your rights. You have the right, if you have the choice. Young people don't always have the choice, but if you're able to have the choice, you're able to have get help or treatment from an actual qualified licensed professional. And within that profession, there are guidelines, there are ethical guidelines, there are governing boards that you can complain to if you're not getting the treatment that's truly supportive of you, the kind of treatment that I'm providing here.
Thank you, everyone, for answering that. We actually had a user question. They wanted to know the name of the bill currently in Ohio legislature that would ban this, if there is one. Is anyone aware of that?
Curtis, are you aware of that? Do you know what it is?
I'm not super aware of that one, no.
I would have to go and look it up right now. Those numbers will morph sometimes.
Yeah.
I would have to check it out. It would take me about 10 minutes to pull that up, and we don't have that time. So
our last question for everyone is what kind of resources do you recommend for anyone who has gone through conversion therapy, and then anyone who wants to educate themselves on it and learn more about it?
So I'll jump in here. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen some trailers for it, and a number of my friends and people who were in who were in the therapies and in the therapies and and experiences that I was in are in a Netflix documentary that's coming out on August 3rd called Pray Away. And it looks like it's going to be phenomenal. And I trust those people and their experiences because they are also my experience. So I would say when that comes out on August 3rd, watch it, share it, get your friends and family to watch it. This kind of thing going mainstream on a platform like Netflix is going to can really blow this wide open for creating laws and creating legislation and turning the tide even more away from sexual orientation change efforts. Another resource is a book called Outlove by a fellow survivor, Julie Rogers, who was in a group with me, who went through some of the same therapies out of that group in Texas, the one that had the online forums. So we are friends, and I trust her words. So there are some coming resources, and do read them, watch them, share them.
Would anyone else like to chime in on that question?
I missed the question. What was it? Can you repeat it?
What resources do you recommend for anyone who has gone through conversion therapy? And then or who else what resources do they have to help educate themselves on conversion therapy?
Oh, okay. Well, my organization, Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, is a very good resource for someone that's been through conversion therapy, that wants to learn from other survivors about their experiences. We do have an event coming up this Sunday, which is a regular event called Survivor Sunday. So, they can always go to that. Otherwise, Trevor Project, Born Perfect, they all have very good resources on conversion therapy for anyone to educate themselves. Like Amanda said, there are a lot of stuff out there. I know a lot of people turn to Boy Erased as kind of a resource to see what it would look like dramatized. There's a lot out there for it. And just quick Google searches even. I mean, this is really, there's a lot of information out there, but those are the top ways you can get some more information and resources for actual survivors.
So one thing that I want to add maybe to that too is that we want to consider that the conversion therapy experiences are very traumatic experiences, and trauma is a very real thing, and it has a lasting effect, and I mean lasting effect, for a person throughout their life. And traumatic experiences can actually be raised to the point of what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very lasting, can stay with a person throughout their entire life, and let them get specific treatment for it. So I would say, please consider reaching out for help. If you've been through these experiences, make sure go to someone who specializes in trauma and somebody who is LGBT knowledgeable.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
I'll add one other resource. Some friends of mine have started an Instagram called The Belonging Table, and it's a place for queer people who are trying to reconcile faith and queer being, and it's a profound space where they are really kind of making room for folks who are hoping to get some connection back with the divine, with some spiritual practice.
I wanted to actually circle back the bill in Ohio. I found it looks like it's SB 50, and it's as of the 1st, it's on hold right now.
Okay.
So I'm glad you found that. I'm sitting here trying to find it, look for it. So I'm glad you located that.
Yeah, those numbers, and every time it's reintroduced, it'll sometimes get a new one. So it's just crazy to keep track of all of them at once.
I like the idea that we have legislation. I like the idea that, we want Ohio to be another one of those states where this is actually declared to be, illegal. But I don't think there's a substitute for educating the public. And I think the best way we can do this is through forums like this and through conversations that each of us who are participating in this will have.
Yeah, well, it's very important because there's a lot of education about conversion therapy, and there's a lot of misinformation about conversion therapy.
Anyone else want to chime in? All right. Well, we are at the end of our agenda for this event. I do want to thank our panelists on here, Mike, Spencer, and Amanda, for sharing your stories and coming forth and being open and willing to do that with us. I want to thank Jim and Curtis for coming and speaking on your expertise. We greatly appreciate you guys being here for this. And as far as Curtis, if you wouldn't mind, I think we might have posted it before, but if you can tag a link for Conversion Therapy Dropout Network somewhere on there, that way people can get a hold of you if needed.
Don't think it will let me put it in the comments.
Or you can always send it to me and I can comment on it later. That way it's underneath the video.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we are going to end our stream here. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
All right, everyone, this does end our conversion therapy panel discussion. This video will be available on our Facebook and our YouTube channel for those that weren't able to watch it tonight. Everyone have a good night, and we will talk to you soon.